Hi, Kelly. Welcome to the Integrative Health Coach Success Podcast.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Yes, thanks for being here. I'm excited for our chat today. I think it's lots of stuff that we kind of both relate to, and it's also a topic that we haven't chatted much about on this podcast yet. So I'm happy that you're here. Would you share with our listeners a little bit about what you're currently doing with your IHP certification?
So currently I'm working virtually like most of the IHPs out there. And I kind of knew you were going to ask this question, and it's kind of a funny start for me. I was one of those people that felt like I needed to have it all together. Like I had to have the website, and so I'll be honest and say, I'm currently working as an IHP. It took me a long time to get there because I was so paralyzed in doing the right thing, the right way. Despite everything I was listening to and hearing. And it was my husband actually that was like, just start going, just start doing. And so I am primarily working with mostly children and moms/families, kind of depending on how that works out. And just I work with a lot of behavioral issues, ADHD, neurological type situations is generally how people get to me. And or I do have 2 celiac daughters, which led me into this journey. And so a lot of gut health issues as well that are, of course, usually correlated to the latter.
Yes. And what were you doing before? Was it, were you kind of just doing your mom thing and it was that you just couldn't get to the, starting the business or just starting to see clients? What was kind of like in that in between holding you back?
Yeah. So I was actually, was a pediatric optometrist. And so I did that for about 11 years. And then COVID hit and things got a little bit wonky. I was, homeschooling my own kids and had stepped out of the office during that time. And about that time, just prior to that, we'd been on a big journey with my middle child being diagnosed with celiac. And so I'd already had kind of a 1 foot in the natural world. I grew up that way. My bachelor's is in human nutrition, and that just kind of spurred that on. And my passion in that world and all things gluten-free became just such a normal for us. And then I started learning all the different correlations and realized some of the other things going on with my daughter that were not gut health related were correlated to her diet and the celiac. And so it just sent me on this trajectory, truthfully, for her at first, but then for my whole family. And then as I was stepping out kind of optometry at that time, there were so many patients coming in who, of course, they would come to me for eye exams because they're struggling in school. Naturally, that's the first step. And their eyes would check out fine. But I now knew this whole conglomerate of things that could be causing these issues. And depending on the patient, sometimes we would work through that. Sometimes they weren't open to it, and then it was out of my scope a little bit to really step into that space, but it was just so needed. And to be honest, it just broke my heart in so many places. And so it just kind of spurred me on to, so I kind of got into the realm of kids to start. Yeah. So optometrist, I don't know that I am done with that. I think, at some point I might go back, or I'd love to somehow incorporate the 2, but for now I've kind of made a little pivot and love doing what I'm doing.
That's great. I can totally see it now, like a holistic optometrist where, and yeah, it's so like, it was probably like a little bit of ADD, like set on by it, because I even had, actually it was my son's reading tutor who was like, I would have his eyes examined. And so I did in my gut, I knew it had nothing to do with his eyes. Like he just had a hard time concentrating, and we made like some other changes and it got so much better. But I can imagine that there's so many like schools, districts, like that's just like their go-to. They're like, oh, have their eyes examined. And you're kind of like, oh, it's so much more than that.
Right. And as you know, like many times the eyes are involved, but it's never usually just one thing, right? It all comes together with the puzzle pieces and fits together. And we're sometimes just missing 1 or 2 of those pieces. So even with optometry and glasses and vision therapy and those are needed a lot of times, but we can only go so far, right? In that realm. And we were just missing the other pieces. So bringing it all together someday in a perfect world would be awesome.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So what I would love to kind of get into next is I've only had a handful, maybe 2 actually, now that I think about it, of practitioners who really work primarily with kids and families. And it sounds like that's one, your passion and obviously your niche. Talk to us a little bit about first the benefits of what you see as far as like kids and getting them. Is it primarily celiac things that you're seeing, or is it more like gut-based issues that you're working with kids?
Gut-based issues. I do work with some celiac kids. Naturally, a lot of people have a connection to me that way, but a lot of just gut-based issues in general.
Yeah. So talk to us a little bit about the benefits that you're seeing within your practice for whether it be kids, families, with the work that you're doing kind of as an IHP and how it kind of all ties in.
Mm-hmm. Oh, such a big question. I would say some of the main benefits that I see, of course, actually probably come out in behavior first before even gut health. Of course, we know they're connected, but focus, a lot of people find me, my child's really struggling with really ADD symptoms. I could probably sum it up to start. And so a lot of issues with focus that because of working on the gut health, and we're getting better sleep, right? Which starts that whole cycle. And just most of them are constipated. I'll be honest. I think probably 70% of the kids that I see are constipated. So of course, better gut health, better digestion, a lot of parasites, of course, fall into there. And so all the symptoms that go with that, of course, rashes, histamine. So we just overall kind of see this general improvement in everyday symptoms, which of course for a child makes up better behavior in their everyday life at school. I've had teachers comment on the success and the differences that they see. Even sometimes before mom will see a difference, she'll say, if there's like a caregiver that's with them a lot, or their teacher will actually report, like, what are you doing? Things seem a little bit different. And sometimes it's as simple, we're not that far in the process. Maybe we've just taken out some inflammatory foods, artificial dyes, like gluten, limited dairy. I try not to be super restrictive with kids if I don't have to, depending on the situation. So sometimes just even the minor changes will make huge differences.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And the truth is with kids specifically, because like they're only been, if it's a 7-year-old, right, their rain barrel's only been affected 7 years versus like if you're dealing with a 60-year-old, right, you're dealing with 60 years of rain barrel. You can sometimes see a drastic improvement in days with children. And like you said, sometimes it's just with food elimination. Sometimes it's just by improving bowel movements, and all of a sudden they're, not constipated. So their mood's different because their belly's not hurting. Like there's so many ways that things can be kind of changed really quickly. And it kind of then gives families motivation to kind of stay on the path.
They can. I mean, honestly, the great thing about working with kids, kind of the good and the bad, is it's really just all about foundations. If mom or the caregiver can establish foundations, and we kind of see that it's all over Instagram right now, right? The de-stress protocol is based on that. And we just make it so complicated. Are they drinking water? Are they going out in the sun? Are they exercising? And we can add on to that, with things like castor oil packs and get a little bit more detailed, but just breaking it down to the foundations. I mean, you can go leaps and bounds. We know as adults, we can do that. With kids, it actually goes so much quicker. But someone has to model that for them and show them that and teach them that. And they're watching, they'll do it. My daughter, my castor oil packs are sitting around, and I have a daughter. She's like, can I try that? Like, what is that like? And she'll grab it and put it on. Now she loves it. I think her body like intuitively knows that she needs that. And she'll ask me like 2 or 3 times a week, she can have the castor oil pack. So, that's a silly example, but they're watching. So just establishing those foundations. It's one of the great things about kids is we see you typically, or many times I should say, pretty quick progress depending on what's going on. Because a lot of times it's just, we made it so overcomplicated and just stepping back to the basics. And I actually really struggled with that in the beginning. Like, am I really going to get on this call and just tell them to go out in the sun and drink water? Like I felt honestly silly about it. Like, I don't know, like this just feels like they are paying me to do so much more than that. But sometimes that's just what someone needs. They just need, a little bit of hand holding, and maybe they don't know. I think as IHPs, what is base knowledge for us, we forget what the general public doesn't know or doesn't realize or understand how things are correlated. And we just say, oh, we know gluten's inflammatory. We know, of course you should do XYZ. And then I say castor oil pack and someone looks at me like I have 3 heads, it's just like base knowledge. So I think stepping it back and remembering, think of a child, like they don't know anything. And if the child is in that shape, probably many times mom and dad are also. And so it's a whole family learning experience, and it's okay to break it down that small and take those small steps. And it's needed because they don't have the base knowledge, and you need to start somewhere.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I still struggle with this sometimes, where I'm like, you're paying me to tell you what I think is super simple knowledge. But I think when you're in this IHP community and we're on social media, and a lot of our, colleagues or people that we interact with or get mentorship from, they also think all of the same things. And so like, it's so hard to imagine that, like, how do people not know that drinking water for kids is important, or that getting them to move their body, or like the benefits of sunlight? It just seems so far from a possibility of that not being a thing, right? That it's really hard to, but so many parents will be like, oh yeah, I don't actually know what he drinks for water. Like, I mean, I fill his water bottle and like, I don't check it, or like he dumps it out. And sometimes just giving them something but what use is it in giving a ton of supplements for constipation if the child's not even drinking enough water, right? The foundations are so important and can sometimes solve so many problems before you even have to get to things like supplements or protocols, that you're almost doing them a huge favor by explaining the foundations.
Yes, it's huge and the biggest thing. And we know that, right? It's why the de-stress protocol is there. If someone's not following that and they're taking all the supplements, it's not going to do any good for them. So, and the same goes for children's. It's even steps down to an even more basic level. To tag onto that, knowing the right questions to ask. So a lot of times I'll say, how many bowel movements are they having a day, a week? And mom says, I'm not really sure, and turns out it'll be a once a week scenario when we get to the bottom of it. So just knowing even just the right questions to ask and pay attention to.
Yes. Whereas all the IHP moms that I know, or at least I'm this way, I'm like, did you poop today?
Yeah.
It's always like,
yeah. Tell me about it. Yeah. What did it look like? My kids at this point are just eye rolling. Is this normal conversation in other people's houses? I'm like, it should be.
And if it's not, I always say, it doesn't matter what other people are doing in their house. Right. We're doing what is right for us in our house. I know. My kids are always like, yeah, you can see it. So you kind of alluded to a little bit of kind of what I think I'd like to talk about next, when you said, sometimes mom and dad are also in, potentially not great of, nutritional shape as kids are. What tends to be some of the biggest challenges that you see if a, mom or dad comes to you and they're wanting to help their child? What tends to be like this overall, challenge that you might see?
Yeah, I would say
a few, if it's not just one.
Yeah, hands down, it's probably just commitment for the family to make the change, not just for the child, because you can only be so committed to packing your child's lunch, appropriately and asking their child to do the foundations. If you're not doing them, you're not eating that way. You're chugging soda on the side, but telling your 11-year-old who used to be able to drink soda and now she can't, it's just not going to work out. And it doesn't. I mean, I'll be honest, like I've had a few fails and more than a few in that scenario where we know what we need to do and where we need to go. But I need mom to walk that out when we're working with a child. And if mom, even if her heart is there and she wants to help her child, but she's not willing to make the changes, then we only get so far. And it's just typically not successful. So I mentioned to you prior, I'm still working this out. I haven't quite figured it out, but I've talked a lot about making it a requirement actually for mom or the family to come on board and not just the child, because we're just so much more successful in that light. So still working through that. I'm not sure exactly what that looks like, but that's typically the biggest challenge.
Yes. Yeah. And it goes back to that like age old saying, like the kids do what we do. They don't do what we say. And oftentimes, at least in my experience, and I also had like a few close like friends that this happened with growing up, like a lot of time when you're just telling the child to do something that you're not actually doing yourself, like then it becomes like this thing right now. It's like this divisive, children can get, eating type of, stuff in their head where they're like, how come I'm the only one in this family who can't drink soda? Or how come it then becomes this thing that doesn't feel too good. And we all know what stress does to the body, even if it's a child, right? And so it can be a really challenging kind of dividing time if it's just do what I say and not what I do to a child, and really no different than it would be, for adults, right? So I think that, that I wouldn't blame you if you ever decided to do that kind of like, onboarding, or like, it's kind of like the primer, right? Like, let's see what kind of, compliance or interest you have in changing some of your habits so that we can, make it successful for your child.
Yes, it's a challenge, nonetheless. And then, on the other side, I have families and parents who are all in. So it just kind of depends. And I think maybe even honestly weeding out the people who aren't, they're committed, but not really, depending on what your capacity is. I don't take on a lot of clients. I would rather work with a few clients and have really great success. And so because of that, I want to be really invested, and I want them to be very invested in me, in the sense of, really walking it out, because that's where we're going to see the changes and the success and the transformations. So it's, it's still working it out. We'll see how it goes, but that's definitely one of the hardest things probably I faced, was working with mostly kids.
Yes. Yeah. I'm curious what amount you see of, because I was kind of like the go-to child, coach within Equal Life, within the company, when we first started seeing, a number of kids. Now they're kind of all spread out between us coaches. But I always saw a huge success with children when they actually appeared on the call with the parents. Now, of course, like not maybe like a 4-year-old or, little, but when we were talking like 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and teenagers, there was some parents who did the calls, on their own for a 14-year-old or an 11-year-old. And they kind of like went and then told the child. But then there was kids that were on the call asking their own questions, kind of like super invested in maybe like a food sensitivity test. Do you see any difference when you're kind of able to interact directly with the child in that sense?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll say 9 and under, I'm typically working with mom, unless, a little bit older child wants to hop on, but specifically I'm usually working with mom, dad. 10 and older, particularly teens, if they can be on the calls, I really do prefer it. And for exactly the reasons you're saying, usually at that age, a lot of those kids that I'm seeing are dealing with gut health, anxiety, depression, and they want out of that. So they want to see the test results. They want to know how they can change, what they need to change. So talking with me again just brings that level of, and this is real. And at that age, mom, just the natural struggles that come with teens knowing everything, mom knowing nothing. So it's just great to have a third party kind of intervening and coming in. But typically, if we've made it that far with that age, I will say, I think teenage boys are the hardest client that I have. It's just a little bit more of a pushback, I think, on certain things, wanting to change certain things. And girls are just a little bit more pliable in that way. But most definitely, I have much more success with that age group when they're on the call. And I don't always do all the calls, I will say. Sometimes the intake is actually with mom, especially if we're talking about some behavioral or focus issues that we don't want to talk about in front of the child. And then we'll do the testing, and then moving on from there, the child will join the call.
Yes. Yeah. Yep. And that totally makes sense. I think sometimes even the child, like seeing, the test results, depending on how old they are. And like you said, how interested, it can kind of be a motivation to say like, okay, rather than just mom taking the information back and kind of regurgitating it to the child and saying, this is what she said to do. I think that there's definitely some benefit when it's, age appropriate and the child's interested. But yeah, I the whole boy thing, my little guy, he plays hockey, and it's like, oh my gosh, the sports drinks and the snacks. And like, that is my biggest, and I'm sure, they're homeschooled, but I'm sure, kids who are in school, it's kind of maybe like the same thing, but I also can't keep him full long enough. It's like, oh my God, they're constantly eating. His appetite is so different than my daughter. It's crazy.
And so much of that too, like kind of goes back, especially with a teen, the expectation that they're going to be all in at 100% week one is unrealistic. So, walking back, that goes back to when we're modeling and teaching them, they learn over time, or they learn when they have a sports drink and feel like crap the next day. You can kind of talk that through, and they might do that 3 more times, right? Like the sports drink. And then you might start to see that they'll say, okay, what maybe is another alternative, or you can provide them with an alternative. And I've noticed that even with my own kids, things that we've had pushback on, sometimes I let them make the mistakes, not with gluten over here because we're celiac, but with other things. And I'll see after, sometimes it takes months, but we'll see changes slowly start happening because they start to learn. They don't want to feel like crap. And if they know what the different options are and maybe start to slowly try them and learn, oh, these aren't actually so bad, and I feel so much better, you'll start to see the changes happening over time. So I think it's the expectation of what's realistic for change, and also knowing, kind of the 80-20 rule. If you control things in your home and you feed them pretty healthy overall, and there's good choices going on when they are out at a party, even at a sports practice, and they have something, it's not the end of the world, probably. Even if you're following a gluten-free diet and gluten-free, dairy-free, I'm just using that as examples because that's what's like so close to us, but it's not going to ruin the world, right? If they make that decision. And I think even as health coaches that working with kids, you have to keep that in light, and mom can't control the pressure to put that on mom, that she needs to control all of that, is just going to be an ending disaster.
Yes. Yeah. I think, you make a great point too. And you can apply this to adults, right? The pressure of perfection being, the end all be all is impossible for anybody, even, an adult, but specifically for children, because things come up and, you don't want it to be this stressful, thing and situation. And I love what you said about kind of like letting them make their own mistakes. Cause I do that all the time. I'm like, sure, we've talked about it, try it, see how you feel. And there's always like this kind of they always come around. And even if they decide to like have the same thing again, we always have a conversation about it. Okay. Like, how did it make you feel? Okay. Well, maybe next time you'll make a different choice. But I think it's really important letting them kind of feeling like there's some autonomy, because again, when you're like the drill sergeant and you're kind of all in and focusing on what they have to do, and you're the one that's telling them that, I think that then you can kind of get more pushback from them than anything else.
100%. And what are they going to do when you're not there then? Right? You're not there to make the decision for them. Like they have to learn to make those decisions, whether that's just when they're at a friend's house or they grow up and move out. Like you aren't going to be there hovering, telling them exactly what to do. So they need to be really like just a teaching environment as they go along. And I'll admit it's easier when we start them at 4, but sometimes we don't start till 16 or 17, and that's okay because we all start somewhere. So sometimes I have moms like in a panic. I didn't know. And none of us know what we didn't know before. Give yourself grace and start making, some right decisions now and teaching them, and it'll all work out. It'll be fine.
Yes. Yeah. And I think personalities come into play too. Like I did the same exact thing with both my 2 oldest kids, and my daughter, if it's white, she'll eat it. White bread, pasta, like she just has not the same appetite as she won't eat animal protein. And I did the same exact thing with the both of them. And my son will try anything. He's super adventurous with food. So sometimes it's also like luck of the draw in a sense, and not beating yourself up as the parent, no matter how much or how little that you're doing the best you can in the circumstance.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'm curious, do you have any like references that you love? If there's people who are listening and maybe like wanted to find more about like kids and not necessarily maybe celiac, but kids and gut health, or it's IHPs listening and they're thinking like, gee, it seems like I'm seeing a lot of kids. And doesn't have to be books. It could be podcasts. It could be social media pages, any resources that you kind of love for kids and health.
Yes. Really, to make this question easy, I was always on a quest to find the information about kids. And the truth is, it is the same. It's the same information. You just need to break it down a little bit further. So there are, some kids pages where things are even on social media that are geared toward that, but take the information that and just break it down, or that you see for adults. What's true of parasites is going to be true for a child. The dosing might just look a little bit different, but they still experience the same symptoms and everything that you've learned and see for adults. So resources, I love Emily Morrow. She's been a great mentor for me. I was one of her clients as well. I think having health coaches is awesome. I worked with Dr. Cabral, years ago as a private client when he was doing that, when I was my own mess in the middle of my own health mess. So working with people, I did Emily Morrow's functional blood chemistry course. That was a wonderful resource, just being able to bring in additional testing and look at things a little bit in a different light. So I've really enjoyed that. I've gone down a rabbit hole lately of methylation and epigenetics and methylation and kids, because I do work with a lot of neurological type situations. Or I should say, behavioral health, mental health. Methylation needs to be looked at. And so there's a book actually I'm reading right now that I'm loving called Your Genius Body. That's been great. I love how basic everything's broken down. That particular topic can just be a lot overwhelming. And so you kind of get the basics, but it just really breaks it down to a practical level, and not just methylation, but some other process as well. So I really enjoyed that. Trying off the top of my head, I'm trying to do the podcast, but I am very much like an input person. So I just read anything I can get my hands on. I read when I can. So, but I would say, Instagram, believe it or not, is, I think we've actually talked about this, a huge resource just for a lot of things like holistic health, especially when it comes to the foundations. And I tell my clients that too, just, look at certain accounts and you can learn so much, especially on just the little things that you can add into your life to be helpful. So it's really all over, but I'd say whatever you're applying for adults also applies for children.
Yes. Yeah. I love that answer. And it's so true. Yep. You don't have to have this specialty in children's, knowledge. You can take a child, understand that a child needs the same exact things as adults from a foundational standpoint, and kind of gear it in a way that it makes sense to implement in a child's life. Yeah, it makes so much sense. And I love Emily Morrow. She's wonderful. Such a wealth of knowledge. And so she's great too.
Yeah, I think really the one thing, the most foundational thing is just the idea of the whole drainage pathway. And I will tell you, 90% of the children I see, their livers need help. Almost every single one. So starting foundationally with the bowel movements and focusing on the liver and making sure the drainage pathways are open. If you can accomplish that, you can make huge success. But that sometimes takes 6 months time, sometimes longer. So just being patient in that, but just learning that, little tidbit and having patience with that, and knowing sometimes you might be in and doing a protocol that's necessary. And sometimes you need to back off and take breaks. That's true as adults as well. And so sometimes as moms, even we can just have our eye on the prize. And we just want to go and get through the protocols and, but it can be a lot sometimes. And sometimes people need to relieve themselves of the stress and the pressure. Sometimes it's mom that needs it. And sometimes it's the child. So to not have this timeline, right? We need to get through this in 4 months or 6 months, even if that's your program or package, you need to have the freedom in that to know that things can take a lot longer in the process of that. And let your clients know that ahead of time as well, that this isn't a 3-month program and we're going to get everything nailed out and be done at the end of this. This is a lifelong journey, right? And we're just doing a piece of it here.
Yes. Yeah. And setting the expectations, is so important. And I think with kids, one of the main differences, it can be the time, because one, you're starting slower. It's hard to, just jump into detoxification with a child, right? You tend to use smaller dosage and do things a little bit slower. And for kids, sometimes you need to pause because you can see, physical symptoms of overwhelm on the body. And I do notice that much more than adults, for sure, that it is sometimes it's more of a touch and go situation. Yeah. If someone's listening and they kind of want to connect with you further or kind of learn more about what you're doing, where are all of the places that you show up, social media, websites, any of that?
Yeah, my website is actually the best place through email would be kelly@designedfamilywellness.com. And my website, designedfamilywellness.com. I'm present on social media, but not so much active as an IHP on there. And I've really struggled with that, if I'm honest and vulnerable about it. I would love to, I just don't have the time for it. And I just haven't, it's one thing I just haven't felt, if I have the time, I'm going to invest it in my clients. And maybe another thing to note here that's if you really invest and help a few children, those moms will tell other moms who tell other moms. Your practice will grow on its own. And so not saying that social media isn't great and necessary. And I'll be honest, it's a great educational tool. I think I need to be more active on there for my own clients even. But there's other ways around it. And that referral process just starts on its own. And then you're seeing mom, and then you're seeing dad, and you're seeing siblings. And so it just outflows from there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Social media. I know lots of practitioners who have very small or no followings on social media and are incredibly successful on word of mouth alone. Yes. And there is no mom more passionate than a mom who sees that she has seen a difference in her child, right? That what that feels like to get on the other side of something challenging with a child's health. There's nothing greater than to know that your children are healthy. And if someone has helped you do that, of course, you're going to tell everybody,
It's so true, and on the hard side of that, I just had a client, we really worked through a major gluten issue. It changed everything for this child. But what happens is the mom posted about that on social media and I got a ton of influx, but then everybody wanted to run this one test, right? And that may not be the one test that their child needs. Mm-hmm. And so there's what really comes in, the discovery calls can be really helpful there. Just for that 15-minute call to kind of just hear a little bit about what's going on and set the stage for what it might look like, for their child moving forward. So, but it gets conversation going. And then people start to realize, oh, I didn't know that was an option, or I didn't know that could be a possibility. So it just really makes for great conversation. And that's one thing I love about doing this is I get to have conversations with moms all day long that are investing in, changing the trajectory of like their families and their lives. And I'm so passionate about it because I've seen it in my own home, but it's so rewarding just to even see their excitement when they see the changes. And it just spurs you on. It grows the passion and the fire even more so.
Yes. Yeah. I couldn't agree more. Well, keep up your beautiful work. And thank you so much for being a guest on the Integrative Health Coach Success podcast. This was such an informative interview, and I appreciate you being here.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Kelly.